What's up everybody, Jameson Redding here with the Road Trip Angler. This video is a little bit different because as you can see, I am sitting at a table and not on the water or standing in front of a boat that I'm reviewing. But what I wanted to do in this video is talk to you about some of the apps that make my life easier when it comes to fishing, whether it's planning my fishing trip or when I'm actually out on the water. Now, I'm not gonna say these are my top 5 or anything like that. These are just my top apps, the apps that I have relied on over the last several years. A few of them I've used for a very long time. A couple of them are new that I've just started using, but I'm very impressed with. And they're not all necessarily fishing specific apps, but they're the ones that I found to do what they do best for what I'm looking for. So let's jump into what those apps are and we'll take a look at them as I go through them on my phone as well. The first thing that I think is very important when you're planning a fishing trip or you're actually already out on the water is knowing what the weather's doing. And unfortunately, I have not found an app that does everything well. And what I mean by everything is I'm not so much concerned about temperatures. Yes, that's important because you have to dress appropriately. But what I'm more talking about is wind. I fish in small boats a lot, and wind can be a factor, but also whether it's gonna rain or if there's pop-up thunderstorms. So the two things that I really want my weather apps to have is very good wind data and very good radar. And I think those are very important when you're out on the water so you know which way things are moving, which banks are gonna be leeward banks protected from the wind, and which banks are going to be wind blown, which could mean the fish are stacked up on, but may make it really hard to fish, especially if you're in a small watercraft like a kayak. So to start with, I'm going to go into my weather apps here. I have the Weather Channel, I have the Apple Weather app that comes standard with the iPhone here, but the two apps that I use the most when I'm not just looking at what the temperature is going to be like or what the standard wind's going to be and whatnot is MyRadar. And again, that is my radar app. It tells you the weather forecast. It has a lot of different layers that you can add. You can put the lightning layer on there, which I really like. So as you come down here, you can see you've got high def satellite. You've got the historical per station, the temp map, all these different radars. But you can go down and you can turn on the forecast, the winds. You can look at the wind direction, the air quality, your temperatures if you want. I always like to keep the hurricane tracker on because I actually have a camp in Louisiana, so I like to be able to get notified when there's a hurricane out in the Gulf in case I need to go move my camper. But you have all these options of things that you can turn on and off layer-wise. Now, I'm not paid by MyRadar in any way. I just find that their radar is really good. Now, we don't have a lot of rain out around us right now, but I'm going to zoom out and show you what you can see on here. Hopefully I can find some. So this is showing you've got a little bit more wind north of us, and it looks like some thunderstorms with some lightning. And this is up in Pittsburgh area, but this is a forecast showing, you know, where it is, where it's going up until right now, which it is 1:49. So it gives me an idea of what direction things are moving with those winds, and it gives me an idea of what that storm looks like. And I really like that because I can track to see, because if I'm just below or just outside of it, maybe I don't want to get off the water if it's going to skirt me and I'm not going to have to worry about that storm hitting. Or maybe it's going to be light rain and not lightning, and therefore I don't have to worry about it. But this lets me know where that concentration of the storm is by being able to see those lightning strikes, seeing that radar data, and know where that more severe weather might be. So that is the quick version of what I use my radar for. There's a lot of different features on here that you can use, and you can turn all those layers on. And again, like I said, you can actually see the forecast a bit better, but I like this app more than anything for the radar itself. Now, I do believe that there are some things you can pay for to get more in depth with this app. I think I have the free version, which may have ads occasionally. You can change, you know, the things that you have. You can subscribe to different things. There's a lot of options that you can do here. I keep it simple. This is my radar app, literally called MyRadar. That's what I use it for. The next app that I use very frequently, especially when I'm kayak fishing or when I'm trying to sight fish like in Louisiana, I want to see what the winds are going to look like, and I want to see a very accurate wind forecast, but I also like being able to tell which direction those winds are blowing and not just see, you know, oh, it's coming northwest or west northwest or whatever. I want to actually be able to see them on the map and see those wind directions. So this is an app called Windy. It's put out by windy.com, and you can really dial in. So you can save different locations, but I know where my camp is. So I'm going to zoom in here, for example, in Louisiana. On the map, I know my camp is right here in Pointe-aux-Chenes, which is at the tip of this little place right here. So I can click that by just tapping it, and I can see what those winds are. 15 miles per hour, as you see up here. And if I move that around, it's going to change, but of course it's going to be very similar to 15 miles an hour anywhere I look. But as long as that is, the little crosshair there is over where I want to fish, I can see that I've got 15 mile per hour winds out of the southeast. The nice thing about viewing this on a map is I can look at different areas and say, okay, if I want to go out in the marsh and fish this area right here, it's going to be a bit protected because the wind is coming across. So I could hug these shorelines and get out of the wind and be able to sight fish a bit better. The other thing that's nice is I can go down here and I can actually zoom this up by the hour. So I can look at 6 p.m. The wind is going to drop to 13 miles an hour, and I can actually look ahead and see what my forecast is going to be. And Monday, it's going to drop down to 9 miles an hour. And I find this to be pretty accurate. And I'm able to look ahead and see what days are going to be the calmer days when it comes to wind, and also see the direction that the wind is coming. You'll also notice that these little things that are flying, the slower they fly, the slower the wind speed is. So 15 miles an hour, you see they're moving a bit faster. Now when I zoom out, you can really tell this color coded. Like green is calmer. The bluer it gets, usually the calmer it is. When it gets green, turns to yellow, and even up higher, like we can go look at where those higher winds were, where those storms were, up around the Great Lakes. You've got some yellow right here. And you can see those wind speeds are a lot higher at 24 miles per hour. And I can click that and change it to kilometers per hour if I want, but I like to keep mine obviously in miles per hour. And I can also look at the forecast for that location, and I can see that the winds are supposed to die down if I want to see it in more of a chart form here, and I can see those directions. Now, again, this is another app that I can subscribe to get the premium version. This also allows me to search locations not on a map, so I can type in what I'm looking for up here at the top, and then I can search, if I want to just skip right to Pointe-aux-Chenes, Louisiana right there, I can skip right to it. You do have your temperature weather stations and stuff like that as well. You can see your forecast, you can see the rain, so you have some basic forecast information, but I use this app for wind. It's the Windy app. It's my favorite app for looking at wind and being able to see where it's going to be hitting at. And again, there's a whole lot more options that you can explore here with weather radars, lightning, and I could probably go premium and combine some of the things that I use the other app for, but I like MyRadar and I like the Windy app for using those two particular things. Now that's enough about weather until we get into an app later on here. I'm going to talk about one that combines some of these other apps together and actually does a pretty good job of doing so I don't have to do as much jumping around. I also have a category here on my phone called Hunt and Fish. But one of the fishing specific apps that I use a lot when it comes to being out on the water or just preparing for a trip is the Fishing Knots app. Now, like a lot of people, you probably have a couple of go-to knots that you really like to use. But I travel a lot and I fish in a lot of different locations for a lot of different species, and sometimes that requires rigging differently using different line thicknesses, different types of line, braided line, fluorocarbon leader, monofilament, or even working with fly line because I do fly fish some as well, and I sometimes make up my own tippets. So having an app to quickly reference knots that I don't use as much and figure out what knots might be the best ones for the application that I'm getting ready to use them for. I have a YouTube video that's my top knots that I use all the time, and I learned to tie a lot of those, honestly, from checking this app out. Now this is an older app. I've had it for a very long time. There may be other fishing knot apps out there, so if you know of one or you like one better than this one, drop a line in the comments for what that app is so that the other people can find it so I can check it out myself. But I like the simplicity of this. It's just called Fishing Knots, and a lot of times I use an improved clinch. So I can click info. It's going to tell me what the knot is and when it's useful. And in the top right, there's a little video camera. If I click that, it's going to give me an animated, very simple way to tie that knot. So it's very simple, it's animated, it's slow, I can watch it over and over again, and I can learn how to tie that knot. I like this a lot. It's a lot simpler to me than trying to watch somebody do it with fishing line, because it's hard to see sometimes with their fingers. So this animated version makes it very simple and very easy to see. So if I don't want to read the info and I just want to go straight to the video, I can do that as well. You know, here's a dry fly knot. There's so many different applications and different knots on here for those knots. Let's go back to the knots. Again, that was to attach a bait, but you can go down through here and look at the different categories that you have. All these are to tie two lines together. So you notice your categories at the top. So you've got attach a hook, fly, or lure. Then you have a miscellaneous category. And again, you can click on any of those and see the info. For tying two lines together, this is another category that I use quite a bit. And you're going to see some knots like the Alberto, the Albright. You can go on down. The blood knot is one that is popular and is great. I use the uni to uni quite a bit, or the double uni, as you see here. And you can actually see how to tie that, and you can alter the number of times you turn the line around itself. But you can see which knots are better for tying fly line to, say, a leader, or tying braided line to a leader material, or tying two lines that are similar together, or two lines that have very different sizes. So like if you're going from, say, a 20-pound main line up to a 50 or 60-pound, you know, leader or shock leader, you can see how to tie these different knots and which knots would be the right knot to use in that situation. You can also tie loops in your line, but all these different reasons for knots, but then what knots fit those categories the best. You can also search it by name. So if you know which knot you're looking for, you can search that at the top, see how to tie that knot. It's very simple, very easy, and it's handy as a reference, especially when you're out on the water. Another thing that's really important to know when you're out on the water or when you're fishing, especially if you're planning on keeping fish, is the rules and regulations in your area. Now, you can always go to the website, and I do recommend to making sure you're staying up to date with those regulations, because you are responsible for knowing them if you're going to be fishing, or for that matter, hunting or doing anything like that. You need to know what the rules and laws are so that you're doing the right things when it comes to handling those fish. You're not keeping the wrong species, or you're not keeping too many of those species, because it's very important, and a lot of times those rules are there to protect those species and those fisheries. But one of the apps that I've used a bit, again, I just have the free version, but typically I'm searching for regulations in a new area that I'm going to. So you can search freshwater salt. I have mine set to Florida Atlantic State waters, and you can go down through for each different species and you can check what those regulations are. So if I clicked amberjack, it's going to tell me my bag limit. It's going to say the season's closed, the minimum size, how you measure it, all the different regulations that might be needed, and the licensing information for that particular species and that particular waterway. So I really do like this app. It's nice. It gives me the ability to find the regulations quickly. I can search different species. So there you go. If I type in snapper, all the different snapper species pop up, and I can check those regulations for Florida, and I can change that location really easy by using the manually set location, or I can turn my permissions on and it will allow it to find where I'm actually at using that location services. There's also tips and stuff in here, and you can set up your own profile and you can look at your maps and things like that, so you can check different areas. Really cool way to just quickly check those fishing regulations and keep up to date on all that. Another app that I use, especially when planning a trip, there's a couple of different ones. iSolunar is essentially what it sounds like. I can select a location. This is home. I can look at the peak feed times according to the moon phase. There's a lot of apps out there that do that. Even some watches just have that built in through an app. But you're able to check and see when those peak and feed times are, the primary, the major, the minor activity periods, and also look ahead and see which days are going to be better according to the moon phase and worse. Now, I don't get super tied up in that, because a lot of times you go fishing when you have time to go fishing. You know, if the weather's nice, you're going to go. But I do believe that it does affect the fishery and the different fisheries. I know it also affects wildlife in general. So if you're a deer hunter, those deer are going to be more active a lot of times during those peak feeds. It is something nice to take a look at. You can get an idea, oh, hey, I was going to quit fishing at like 1 o'clock, but the peak feed starts at 1:30, 2 o'clock. Maybe I'll stay on the water a little bit longer and see if those fish turn on. And I think when conditions are tough, let's say in the middle of the summer, when it's a bit hotter outside, the water temps are higher, the fish are less active, that's when it really starts to dial in to these different little nuances that can contribute to the fish feeding and not feeding. So that's when I start to look at this a little bit more, is when the bite is tough, and then I want to see if there's a certain window that should be a little bit better than others. But having some type of app that shows you those lunar phases can be really handy. Before I jump into the final app that I think will replace a lot of these other apps, the other app that I use is Navionics, which is an app put out by Garmin. Garmin owns Navionics now. It is an app that you have to pay for, and it's not necessarily a cheap app. I don't remember the exact price point of what it was. I pay annually for the app. I think you can also set it up on a subscription platform where you're paying monthly for it, and you can probably turn it on and off if you need to. But one reason I like it is for lakes. You get all the contours, so let's just find a quick lake here. I've got some areas downloaded in here. You can see those are blocked off. So like Wilkesboro is close to my house, W. Kerr Scott Reservoir. What's nice is you can get on here and you can see the contour lines, you can see the buoys, you can see the fish attractors that are put out on the lake, and you can see the boat ramps. It also measures your speed, which it says right now that I'm moving 6 miles an hour. I am not. So I wouldn't say this is a very accurate way to measure. It has went away now. But if you let it acclimate and you have good GPS signal on your phone, usually the speed will find its place and be pretty accurate compared to my fish finder. So if you don't have a fish finder, this is a good way to track your speed. You can also track where you've been, and you can see all those contour lines on the lake. I really like the ability on this app to see not only the depths and contours, but I can go here and find the different tide buoys. So instead of looking at it on a chart and just guessing at which tide buoy is going to affect the area that I'm fishing, I can find the closest one to it, put the little crosshairs over it, Sheep Island, and then I can hit this question mark, and it's going to show me those tides down here at the bottom on this chart. So I can see when the highs are going to be, when the lows, and what they're going to actually be as well. So I can get an idea of when that tide change is going to take place and which direction that tide is moving. And that really helps you narrow down those fishing times that you want to be on the water, especially when you're talking about the East Coast that has the bigger tide swings. It's also important to know, because a lot of places have those larger tide swings, you could get stuck if you're fishing shallow like I like to do. So knowing when those tides are going to change, having an idea of when I need to pull off of that flat or when I need to get out on the water is very important. And I find this app very useful for knowing those tide changes in the different areas. Because, for example, these two are very close together here at Manus Harbor. You have one, and then just across on the other side of the bay, you have one on the outside. Well, if you don't know which one is right and you go by the wrong one, it could be drastically different on what that tide is doing. So trying to find the one that's closest to where you're going to be fishing is important. This also shows you all the different channels. So if you don't have that on your boat, you can actually use this app. You know, while you're boating, you can save these maps in here. So if you don't have signal, you can still see those navigational areas and those channels and those channel markers and those buoys. You can also see the different marinas. There's a lot of information here that allows you to take advantage of this when you're planning for a trip or even when you're on the water. So definitely check out that Garmin boating app. One of the final apps I want to talk about is actually one that I'm very excited about. They continue to improve it and add features to it, but as it first came out and I started using it, it was primarily focused on rivers, but it has quickly become broadened, and now it's starting to add the contours like you saw in the Navionics app. They've also added a lot of different layers that you can turn on and off to see the wind, to see the radar, to see even the cloud cover, and a few other things. It's the OnWater App Fish. Right off the bat, I can see my location. I'm going to go to satellite mode and think about this like a road map. So like Google Maps, but for rivers or bodies of water for that matter. So I've got already in my layers, I have my rivers turned on, I have my creeks turned on, I also have my featured rivers and my lakes, so I can see all this water and all these public access points and boating access points and fishing access points on all these different bodies of water. So it's very helpful when I'm planning a trip, but let's just go to where I'm at right now. So I live in Rhonda, North Carolina, and not too far from us is this little river here called the Yadkin River. But you can see by opening this that you get a description of the body of water. You can go look at photos. You can see tackle and fly shops in the area, and even shuttles and outfitters that are listed here, and private land opportunities if they exist. Now, I clicked on the whole entire river, but I can go to the conditions tab and see all the flow stations for that river as well, which is super important. I used to have a separate app called River Data that I used, and there's other apps out there, but I use those apps to get that different flow data, which is so important when you're river fishing, to be able to know, where that average height is, if the water is going up, if it's coming down, if it's in a drought. It lets you keep an eye on like what the river is doing, and it's important when trying to figure those fish out. And if you have a day where you go on the water and the flow is good and you catch a lot of fish, you memorize that flow, or you can even save it in here. So let's say I wanted to save the chart because I know I like to fish this area where the Yadkin River's in Wilkesboro. I can show that chart, see what the river's doing. I can also then save this particular one by hitting add to my favorites. Now, I already have this particular river saved in my favorites, which is why I don't have this little plus symbol on this particular flow chart or this particular gauge right here. If I wanted to add a new one, I can click add. When I go in here, I can actually put in the ideal situation that I've learned over years of safe fishing this one spot. These are the ideal CFS, the ideal feet that I want to fish at, and here's the highest and lowest that I would be willing to go fishing before it gets dangerous or too low to really be navigable. I can save all that to my favorites and to my water, and it gives me all that information so I can go back and look for it. Another thing that I find really convenient, because gone are the days of me having to go through and drop little breadcrumbs on Google Maps or Google Earth to measure the distance between a put-in and a takeout. I can simply click measure on here. I can choose an access point that I'm going to be putting on the water. I've already got it set to snap to river, and then I can choose the takeout point, and it's going to tell me how many river miles it is, 5.1, and I can save that float as well so that I can go back later and look at that float. So very, very helpful when I am looking at new stretches of river that I haven't floated before, and looking at how long it potentially will take me by looking at the CFS and that distance on the river. And it snaps to that river, and it doesn't have to be a public access. If you have private access, you can click on the river in that spot, click on an area where you plan to take out, or if you're trying to single access, you can kind of get an idea of how far in river miles that's going to be, which is very, very helpful. Now, as I mentioned, they're adding all those contour lines to a lot of the lakes. They're also working on adding some of that tidal information for the coastal waters as well. But I have primarily been using this app so far for rivers, and I absolutely love it. But a few other things that this does, which keeps me from going outside of this app to other apps, is again, when I click on that river or that location, in addition to looking at the charts, I can see the weather forecast by clicking 10-day forecast. So I can see what the wind's going to be, what the weather is going to be, and I can also dial it into precipitation, wind, pressure, a lot of different options here on what I want to check. And I can check the regulations for that area by clicking that, and it will give me links to the different websites that tell me the boating information and the fishing information for that area. That includes the boating regulations and the fishing regulations, or at least it takes me to that website that would be the governing body for that area that I'm fishing. You have tons of different map options as well. As you look at these different rivers, you can actually see some of the terrain by zooming in on a 3D or 2D different options on the map. You can also go to your layers and change the coloration and the type of map, whether it's satellite image or just outdoor. And the cool thing about this is if you get into these layers and you start playing around with the public and private land, you can see that you have some private land but surrounded by tons of public. Red is private, the green is public. So on these smaller creeks and stuff, it's important to know where you can access and where you can't. Now this is the Hiwassee River, and you can see all the public land around this area and the public boat access is by turning those layers on and off. So a lot of features here that you can control with the different layers that allow you to see all of the different types of information that you may want to be able to see. Now it gives you the ability to also journal and stuff, and I'll talk about that in a second, because you can turn those on, you can save your waypoints, you can have your routes show up, you can turn all those on and off. That's your personal content. But here's where I think it gets really interesting. I mentioned that this allows me to stay in one app and not have to close this app and toggle back and forth to multiple apps, finding that same location or saving that same location to find that information. So I can turn on my precipitation radar, I can turn on my wind speeds and wind gust at different times. You can't necessarily run them all at the same time, but it would get too, overwhelming on the app anyway. So once I turn that on, so just like on MyRadar, I can see that there's precipitation over here by the Great Lakes right now. And if I hit play, I can actually see the progression of that rain and where those heavy rain and possibly storm areas are. And as I turn these different layers on, let's look at rain accumulation. This is going to give me an idea of where that heavier rain is based on the different colorations here. So you got really heavy rain accumulation where it was darker there. And I can also look at my wind speed, and over here is my miles per hour. And then you can see on your coloration what that's going to look like. So in addition to the forecast, you can really see where that heavy wind's going to be, and you can look at the forecast to see which direction it's going to be. So not quite as detailed as the windy app, but I can get an idea that this wind is really ripping in this area right here offshore. And as I zoom in to like where my house is, pretty mild day here. Like we don't have a lot of wind going on. So very helpful to have these different layers. I think it was one of the more important layers that I was able to add or toggle on and off to be able to check and plan for where we were going to be fishing in Georgia was actually the cell coverage layer. This is so cool. So I was able to say, I have AT&T. I'm click this layer. I'm going to go out. All that blue area is where I have good cell phone service. And the areas that you see here where there is no blue are areas that I likely won't have good cell service. So because I know I have a river saved, the Nuntula, that I was planning on camping there and fishing when I was on that Georgia trip, I can go to that river and see that a lot of that area that I'm going to be fishing, I'm not going to have service. So I can let my family members know, my wife know ahead of time that I likely won't have that service. So just a lot of really cool things you can do here. And I am still learning because there's so many things that I can turn off and on. I can turn on the fly shops, the campsites, parking, restrooms, all this information. So if I'm planning a day out on the water, I can see those places around the lake. I can see those places on the rivers, and I can turn all these on and off and really get as much or as little information as I want out of this app. And there's still so many things that I am learning. Like one of the other cool things is I can actually do a journal. I have not added an entry yet, but let's say I've caught a fish and I want to add an entry. I can add a photo. I can go to my photos, select a photo, add that in there. And also if I do it based on the time, it will have a lot of that other information about where I caught the fish, what the conditions were when I caught that fish, and it's going to save that in there, which over time is going to help you journal those fish catches and keep up with things to be able to make better decisions when you're planning that fishing trip in the future. One thing I didn't mention that is another way of adding layers is if you're looking for certain species, let's say you're really wanting to catch trout and you would like to catch brook trout. And here on the East Coast, that is actually the only species that is native, truly native to this area. I can see what their range is. And I can also see where their range is like more concentrated by the colorations on the map. So you can really get into planning very broadly, right down to the river float that you want to do, or the access point on the lake or at the coast that you want to use, and whether or not it even has restrooms and cell phone service with the OnWater app. So hopefully this video, which I know is very long, but hopefully it helps you utilize some of those apps to be able to plan your day and have a better day out on the water and plan those future trips. If you enjoy this content, or if you'd like to ask a question or just leave a comment. Be sure to do so. Hit that subscribe button. As always, thanks for watching.